This is All India Radio. In the weekly program Current Affairs, now we bring you a discussion on Rozgar Mela, government's efforts to boost employment opportunities. The participants are A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Shekhar Iyer, political analyst. The moderator is Aditi Tandon, journalist.
Earlier this week, Prime Minister Narendra Modi opened a very important employment fair, which he called the Job Mela. And the objective of the fair, as we all know, is to create 10 lakh jobs over a period of few months. And the deadline for the government is December 2023. As we all know, Mr. Bhattacharya, that the issue of vacancies in the government sector, government being the largest employer as of today, has been bothering several governments. Under Mr. Modi, proper review of the human resource situation of various ministries and departments of the government was ordered earlier this year, after which in June, the Prime Minister directed that all ministries should in mission mode start filling up jobs. So this job fair is actually a culmination of that direction which came from the PMO in June this year, and 75,000 applications came and appointment letters were issued as the starting point for the Job Mela, and 10 lakh jobs are to be generated over a period of few more months going forward to December 2023. How do you look at this mission mode exercise by the government to fill up government jobs?
As you rightly pointed out, this is just a beginning of an exercise which appears to be very ambitious. And as you pointed out, that there are about 10 lakh jobs will have to be filled in the government sector. And these include the various central ministries the government has. Let me give you the enormity of the challenge. Over the last many years, the government has not been filling its vacancies. As a result of which, at the end of probably last year or so, the total number of employees in the central government departments and some of the government organizations, including the Indian Railways, came to around 3.1 million people. Now, the total vacancy was 4 million. So in other words, there was almost about 1 million vacancies that had to be filled if the government were to commit itself to filling its own vacancies. So what the Modi government is doing is actually trying to fill these vacancies that should have been filled in any case, and going beyond it, they want to have, in the next 18 months or so, they want to complete this recruitment process. Now, this is going to be a very, very ambitious task. From the government point of view, it's a good move, creating jobs. It addresses political challenge as well. While from the government side, it will probably create some sort of a fiscal challenge as well. But then it can create more jobs in the government sector. It can be seen to be having some sort of a knock-on positive effect on the larger economy. On that, there are various opinions whether government jobs create the same impulses in the pace of economic activity as private sector jobs. But in brief, this is an ambitious task, good beginning.
Yeah, I think Mr. Bhattacharya, you've wrapped it up very well considering the enormity of the situation. In fact, if you look at the cumulative vacancy rate in the central government employment currently, it is almost 22%, so which means 1 in every 5 sanctioned central government posts are lying vacant. So that is the humongous challenge which this government faces. Bringing you back to the issue of challenges, like the Prime Minister, when he was addressing the country while inaugurating the Job Mela, he made 2 very important points. One, he said that, the crisis and the side effects, he used the term side effects of COVID-19, which is once in a century pandemic, cannot vanish in 100 days, and that nobody actually expects any country or any government to do that. He also made a point that large economies, developed economies, are also struggling hugely at this moment with not just food inflation but also unemployment. We know what is happening across the European countries. We know the situation of food inflation and joblessness there also. So basically he was trying to say that the Indian economy is looking up. We are actually the 5th largest in the world now. Where do you place the robustness of the Indian economy in context of the job challenges of the government?
We have to put the entire job challenge in a larger context of the Indian economy. Remember that the central government employs just about, as I told you, around 3 million people. And the total workforce in the country is around 470 million. The government's role in creating jobs in its own departments and ministries can actually make very little difference to the overall employment situation in the country. What it does is it sends out the signal that the government is wanting to fill up the vacancies that it has. Now, let's separate the two challenges. One is the larger employment challenge, and the other is the government's functioning challenge, which is to be filled with these vacancies. Now, within this, remember that why there is a 1 million vacancy, at least 10 to 15% of these vacancies have actually been filled by non-regular employees, the part-time employees, or the contractual employees. So I think the entire exercise of filling 1 million jobs in the next 18 months, a good part of it can be achieved if you regularize those people who are already on contract in the government system. Now, because over the last few years, what we have seen is that contractualization of the Indian workforce has taken place not just in the private sector, but also in the government sector, which is why this initiative on the part of the government to go in for filling these vacancies at this point in time is significant. Therefore, if you regularize these people, what happens is that these employees get many benefits which right now they are not getting. But at the same time, as I said, that it is also a fiscal challenge, because if you have a contractual employee, you don't carry many of the burdens, the pension burden, the provident fund burdens. Right now, of course, there is a national pension system, but nevertheless, those burdens are less. So it is, as I said, that it's a challenge for the government, but it will not address the larger employment issue in the Indian economy, which, as I said, around 470 million workforce, out of which around 42% are in agriculture, and a very small portion is in the formal urban sector. And we are talking about this formal urban sector employment. And
Right.
when we say that the government will be employing 10 lakh people or 1 million people in the next 18 months.
Mr. Iyer, how do you see this very important initiative, considering the Prime Minister said that many NDA-ruled states as well as UTs of Jammu and Kashmir, Dadra and Nagar Haveli will also follow suit with these kind of employment fairs?
Indeed, Aditi ji, this is a very, very significant, I would say, drive, because the center has been on a mission mode, as you mentioned, since last June, to fill vacancies in government departments and ministries. What has happened was, during the COVID and even before that, there was a backlog of vacancies which could not be filled for various reasons. And also in some other cases where vacancies which were lying dormant, in the sense that people were not even aware that there were sanctioned posts and they had not been filled. So what we have seen is, since last June, apart from the Department of Personnel and Training, the Department of Expenditure also has been working in coordination and to identify where there are sanctioned strengths which have not been filled, what is exactly the position. And so finally, the kind of regular follow-up were also done. Now today you are looking at a scenario where the target of eliminating 10 lakh vacancies, or in other words, recruiting 10 lakh people by December 23 looks like achievable target. I mean, that is a very significant thing. And it was mentioned in March 1st, 2021, the number of persons employed by the center and union territories stood at 30 lakhs. As against the sanction of 40 lakhs. So there it was calculated that vacant positions in government departments were about 9,90,000 or 24% of the total sanction strength. Since then, circulars have gone out. As I mentioned, Ministry of Finance has also been, particularly the Department of Expenditure has been following it up. And these posts are at various levels. At the grade 4 level, you have drivers, cleaners, and other staff members. So, and also it goes up to even grade 1. So this has been a big process, and Prime Minister's inauguration of Mela kind of thing is actually a completion of the process of selection of vacancy in few months' time. And the fact that appointment letters were given in one go, and these are to the youth who are in the age group of 18 to 29, and in about 38 ministries. And those agencies include your Central Armed Force personnel, sub-inspectors, constables, lower division clerks, steno, personal assistants, income tax officers.
Shekharji, just taking you back to Prime Minister's remarks when he inaugurated the job fair, in no uncertain terms, the Prime Minister acknowledged that the global economic situation is extremely testing in these times. He also said that, the side effect of once in a century pandemic of COVID-19 cannot be wished away in 100 days. And he said that nobody is also anticipating that in 100 days we can actually tide over the crisis which COVID has induced. But Equally, the Prime Minister stressed the fact that India has managed to insulate itself largely from the ongoing clouds of global recession. As we all know that Western economies are struggling, a lot of countries in Europe are struggling. Food inflation in the UK is going through the roof. We are reading it every day. In India also, obviously, the job situation is very dicey and we are at 4-year low as far as the employment rate is concerned. But the Prime Minister did instill some hope that the future will be different.
Exactly, Ditiji, you have brought out a very important aspect that the Prime Minister highlighted. You know, the COVID and the post-COVID situation has left many economies in a very bad shape. In fact, many people are fearing it is headed towards kind of a recession. And when you have a recession kind of scenario at a global level, how much of India can be insulated is a debatable question. Of course, ours is an inward-looking economy, so we may not be that affected. But the fact remains COVID and the post-COVID had made things very difficult in our country. But the fact that the government went on a very careful, calibrated way, the way they waited for Atmanirbhar package, then followed by, lot of incentives in terms of Skill India, Startup India, then for Atmanirbhar, programs where self-reliance was placed as a premium. So that was also a very important thing. And that is why when you are getting information about India emerging as, fifth largest economy, how it has moved up, that is largely because government has been able to, not immediately provide, one-time solution, but working towards solution in various sectors. And that has resulted in all these things. Some kind of hope, and that picture is not so dismal. Definitely, the government decision, even to fill up the vacancies, largely because the government realizes as the largest employer in this country, in the public sector, it must do its bit. That is why it started looking at the vacancies within its own system, because ultimately the jobs will have to be created in the private sector, because when the economy picks up, when our productivity increases, the jobs will be found there. But at the same time, government did not want to keep its hands tight. So government said, okay, let me also do something. And the other point that the Prime Minister pointed out was the kind of expenditure that is being undertaken at the public sector level, at the government level, towards infrastructure creation, whether it is building highways or, the new railway lines, new train services, port management, port development, or leakages to all these various modes of transport. All these involves huge construction activity, and that is also generating jobs, which may not be reflected immediately in terms of statistics available to us, but definitely you are seeing there is a pickup, and this pickup will be reflected when figures are compiled by, say, early next year or middle of next year. But these are indications. So one, we must see how in the post-COVID situation, how has India recovered when you compare with the situation in other countries.
Mr. Bhattacharya, we have seen of late that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has singularly focused on Atmanirbharta, the issue of self-reliance in jobs and in various other sectors of the economy. And there's a complete shift towards, government's focus, government support to startups. And India's startup ecosystem is now at number 3 in the world. We saw how 40 companies entered the Unicorn Club only last year. So, this whole focus and this whole shift of the mindset away from the government being the principal employer to self-employment and startup ecosystem where you don't actually become a job seeker, you actually become a job creator. Is that a good sign for an emerging, developing economy?
Well, I think I'm glad you raised this issue. Yes, it is a good sign, but it is a good sign and becomes a better sign in normal times. The startup ecosystem, which has created jobs for entrepreneurs and other people, is a good movement, and I think it should be encouraged. But relying on just Atmanirbharata at this point in time probably will not be the only medicine for handling or tackling the employment challenge. It's because if you look at the globe, look at the world is facing a kind of a recession or slowdown that, needless to say, will also impact the Indian economy going forward, because Indian economy is still dependent, almost 30% of its economy is dependent on export and import. In other words, the foreign trade is dependent on 30% of the economic activity. So we cannot be insulated from what is happening to the world. So if our exports suffer, then I think it will affect the economy. So the need of the hour to sustain the job movement or sustain employment is not just Atmanirbharata, but going beyond it, make sure that the government expenditure on capital asset creation continues unabated. Already, if you will remember, Mr. Anand, that last budget had given a huge increase in the government's capital expenditure. I would imagine one of the ways out of this employment challenge, to face the employment challenge, would be to continue increasing capital expenditure, which will create productive assets in the economy and which will create more jobs, not just in the government sector, but also in the private sector. Imagine a situation where the government spends more money on building more roads or expanding the railway network. The companies that will get the orders for building those roads or building those railway facilities are in the private sector. They may not be in the government sector. So therefore, governments maintaining its capital expenditure is permissible and will be encouraged and will help meeting the larger employment challenge of the economy. We cannot just remain content with Atmanirbharata in this case, but we have to go beyond Atmanirbharata and make sure that the government, which accounts for almost 16% of the Indian economy, must keep spending more money on capital creating assets and curtail its revenue expenditure like wasteful expenditure or subsidies, etc., so that there is more bang for the buck, as they say, and the employment challenge is properly met.
That's an excellent point, Mr. Bhattacharya, because recent studies have actually revealed that new jobs would be created in, away from the urban centers which are saturated and in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And as you rightly pointed out, that the budget also placed immense emphasis on infrastructure creation and a huge economic impetus has been given to that sector. So obviously, if infrastructure is being created, roads are going right down to the tier 2, tier 3 cities where job opportunities will ultimately reach, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think it works both ways. One is that it creates jobs and then it gives an impetus to consumption, because the moment you create jobs through this infrastructure creation, and remember, India is infrastructure deficit right now. So therefore, by meeting that infrastructure deficit, you are achieving two goals, killing two birds with one stone. One, you are addressing the demand for jobs. When you pay that person who is undertaking that activity and bridging the infrastructure deficit, he is getting a salary and therefore his consumption is going up, and that creates more demand in the economy. And then there is the virtuous cycle that is created in the economy through this expenditure on infrastructure, and that addresses the job challenge, that addresses the consumption challenge, and that also therefore addresses the growth challenge. So once you achieve that virtuous cycle, I think that approach will be able to help the Indian economy in a far more substantive way than just focusing on a few incentives or support system to be created for segments of the economy.
Shekharji, we already know that India has emerged as the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. We now have about 107 unicorns, which valuations of course, USD 1 billion or more each unicorn. And the year 2021 alone, if you see, we saw a record 44 entries to the unicorn club. So, Prime Minister's increasing pitch with respect to Atmanirbharta is also picking up, in the sense that you cannot endlessly depend on the government for employment, and you cannot endlessly also depend on conventional modes of employment. You have to find new avenues. You have to generate self-employment, create a startup ecosystem. So India has to look at another, policy level with respect to employment generation. There has to be a transformation in this sector.
Definitely, Aditi, as the Prime Minister pointed out, the most job-intensive sectors are particularly agriculture, definitely the private sector, and MSME, the medium and small-scale enterprises. That is where the jobs. Now, because of the possibility and potential of these sectors to create jobs, that is why the importance of skilling India's youth for the future has become very important. That is why the central government is emphasizing most on the skill development of youth. You have the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, where a huge campaign is going on to train the youth according to the needs of the industry. This is a very important program where, from the whatever figures that are available, about 1.25 crore young people have been trained under Skill India Abhiyan, various skills, whether it is involves blacksmith or goldsmith or all kinds of crafts. That skills are being upgraded and they are being regularly put to test. Certificates are issued so that with those certificates, these youth can get jobs. That is one thing. Then you have got the other things that has happened is, new initiative, like for instance, liberalizing drone policy. opening up of the space policy, and Mudra Yojana, 20 lakh crore worth of loans have been given. These are also creating a situation where, see, no more you are looking at a situation where the jobs will be there for youth to get, but also to encourage a situation where self-employment program is also encouraged, so that each individual who is today looking for a job can actually avail these Mudra loan and other loans, and possibility of he himself in a position to give 10 other people jobs. This is the kind of thing. Now, apart from that, encouragement given to self-help groups, particularly the khadi and village industry, that itself is generating a lot of possibilities and scope. For instance, for the first time in the country, goods produced under khadi and village industries, they have crossed 4 lakh crore. And 4 lakh crore of, the volume, the turnover, if that is the value, the corresponding terms, job creation is being seen somewhere between 3-4 crore jobs, under this. And in this, lot of women are also involved. So therefore, this is one aspect. The other aspect is the kind of relief that was given during the COVID and post-COVID to the MSMEs. And that is, in MSMEs, the idea is to protect the jobs, because already employing a lot of people, about 1.5 crore jobs. So that had to be protected, so incentives were given. Similarly, Manrega. Manrega is one which is intended to create jobs. Similarly, today about 7 crore people are covered in Manrega. As you mentioned, the biggest and the most ambitious project which looks at creating jobs is, of course, the Make in India and the Atmanirbhar Bharat. So, that is why you have seen in the defense sector or in other key sectors, lists have been drawn up where you have stopped imports of certain goods which can be easily be made here. And defense sector, we have stopped many things, including light combat aircraft, you have got helicopters, lot of armored vehicles, so many things which used to come from here are now being manufactured in India, and the Defense Ministry has issued direction that purchases will be made from these, our Indian industries, so that they create jobs, they also, contribute towards that self-reliance.
Mr. Iyer, as you were speaking, I was also thinking that, we are almost at the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution, and artificial intelligence in the future is going to impact job creation in a big way. And you just said that a lot of jobs are being created by small and medium enterprises, which is actually true, because recent very important study from 300 districts of India actually showed that jobs are being created more by the younger and smaller firms as against the larger and established ones. So clearly the government has a stake in promoting the small and medium industries, because according to one estimate, India will need to create 100 million more jobs by 2030, because that's the kind of workforce we are going to have, and we need markets to absorb this workforce.
That is the kind of target we have before us. And we must also not underestimate the fact that, whenever thousands of kilometers are being added to the national highways, are being constructed. I mean, they have been done in the last 8 years. And constantly work is going on, as I mentioned earlier, in doubling railway lines, in gauge conversion, electrification of railway lines. Definitely, these are being done only with creation of new jobs, because these require hands, because these involves technology, but at the same time, they require huge number of manual labor also. Similarly, when new airports are coming up, railway stations are being modernized, new waterways are building. Now, these are all, and apart from that, what about Prime Minister Awas Yojana, where 3 crore houses are being built under this scheme. This kind of schemes also create jobs, because so many masons, so many laborers are put in this. So you can see one thing, Aditi ji, which is that center is not looking at just one sector or one way of it. In fact, they are simultaneously, they want to push forward in several fronts. So that is why you are, say, for instance, when they have allotted 1 lakh crore for infrastructure, can be scaled up in a manner in which jobs are created and new sectors are opened up. Take, for instance, tourism. Now, tourism is one area which suffered a lot during COVID, and post-COVID, it has been slowly picking up. Now, air travels have increased, trade services have become normal. All these are happening. But at the same time, there's new focus being given to religious tourism. The places of faith and spirituality and historical importance, these are being developed across the country, whether it is Ayodhya, whether it is Banaras, Kedarnath, or even Ujjain, the latest thing with the Prime Minister inaugurated there. So these are also creating jobs in the interior areas, because you need service sector to provide for the new arrivals of tourists. So this is also an area which is getting a lot of attention. So what you can see is that the government is looking at, jobs as not about just some departments creating jobs and everything, but view and a wholesome view, which sees that sectors are encouraged to create jobs, and government itself, it comes forward and is recruiting wherever possible, because this recruitment itself is to, generate some kind of a push in the economy.
Mr. Bhattacharya, I would also like to draw your attention to a very important pattern that we can witness in Prime Minister Narendra Modi's own efforts with respect to boost to certain sectors. We've seen how he has personally led from the front when it comes to rejuvenation of religious tourism in the country, which is actually, I think, a sector where demand, both domestic as well as, international tourism demand has been latent for many years because of various reasons. Now there's a huge interest in this sector. You saw how Prime Minister visited Ujjain for the inauguration of the Mahakal. Then he went to Badrinath, Kedarnath. He was in Ayodhya for the Deepotsav on the eve of Diwali. How do you look at this rejuvenation of the religious tourism circuit? Because this has immense potential, not just for the country and job generation, but also for giving a fillip to the economy.
You are right. I think it has got, as in many of Mr. Modi's initiatives, there is political aspect, there is also an economic aspect. The political aspect, as you pointed out, that it helps revive certain religiosity in the country, which feeds very well into the political narrative of the government. On the economic side, what a boost to such tourism does is the collateral benefits that the economy gets in terms of new infrastructure facilities creation. Now, the moment you want to promote any touristic activity, you will see the need for creating new facilities, improving the facilities that already exist, and therefore more money is poured into it. And it also means that the large numbers that constitute the Indian diaspora, many people who are interested in Indian culture, they start coming to this country, and therefore the government also earns a lot of foreign exchange earnings that also get sustained. This policy will work far more effectively in the current situation because hopefully the COVID is receding in the background and tourism can reclaim the place that rightfully belongs to it. And if you have seen the civil aviation sector, even the railway traffic sector, there is a revival of the pace of activity in all these sectors. So I think tourism is a good sector which will have these benefits for the economy.
Mr. Bhattacharya, the Prime Minister, while inaugurating the job fair, said that India is taking a number of risks to protect itself from the impact of the global recession headwinds. We heard what he said, that so far, he used these words, that so far we have managed to insulate ourselves from this recession and its adverse impact. You, being a very keen student as well as observer of the economic situation, how much should we be worried about this impact of the global recession that we witness in many countries now? How much should India be worried?
India is not a completely insulated economy from the rest of the world. Whatever happens in major economies, they will impact the Indian economy as well. And it is not just an economic crisis. There's also a geopolitical crisis that is going on right now. So it is actually, in a sense, it is a perfect storm where geopolitical crisis is combining with an economic challenges. So therefore, we have to sort of stay alert, and so far we have managed to contain the adverse impact of whatever is happening in the globe. But our crude oil prices, on which we depend to the tune of 85% to meeting our domestic needs, actually prices have gone up. But our government finances are doing well. Inflation is still not under control, but if RBI puts its head to it, I think it can bring inflation under control. And that's what the forecasts are suggesting. The importance of sensible policy, prudent policy, has never been more than in the current situation, which means that the government must stay true to the path of fiscal consolidation, which means that the government and the RBI must focus on maintaining a low inflation rate so that people don't tax by higher prices. And finally, it is important to keep your external sector as stable and strong as possible. So I think our current reserve situation is good, but we need to be very, very cautious because these reserves can evaporate very fast.
Mr. Bhattacharya, so what you are saying essentially is that there are many challenges, but certainly not insurmountable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aditi.
You were listening to a discussion on Rozgar Mela, government's efforts to boost employment opportunities. The participants were A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Shekhar Iyer, political analyst. The moderator was Aditi Tandon, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.